Heat still clung to the late afternoon when the rangers first noticed the unusual sight in the stretch of pale dust ahead of them. An elephant calf stood motionless beside a massive gray form lying on its side, the stillness of the scene unsettling. In a place normally filled with slow, rhythmic movement, the calf's ears trembled with tiny, irregular flicks, and his legs quivered as if exhaustion had pushed him to the edge. Yet his small body stayed pressed close to the fallen shape of his mother. Nothing about him suggested panic. Instead, there was an eerie quiet, as though he had already spent hours in this same place, holding the same impossible vigil. One of the rangers murmured, "Easy, little one," under his breath, though the calf was too far away to hear. The words were spoken more out of instinct, shaped by the weight of the scene unfolding in front of them. They halted their vehicle, a good distance back, choosing to approach on foot with steady, slow movements. Dust lifted around their boots in soft clouds as they advanced, careful not to startle either mother or calf. Even from afar, they could see how the mother's flank rose only slightly with each faint breath, her trunk resting loosely in the dirt. The calf adjusted his stance when the rangers came closer, stepping between them and his mother. His head lowered, not in aggression, but in a hesitant uncertainty, as though he did not know whether to flee or continue defending her with his small, untested body. His tail swayed weakly, and a low rumble escaped him, thin, unsteady, and tinged with the confusion of an animal that sensed danger but did not understand its shape. The rangers spread out, giving him room, letting him see their hands stay lowered and slow. The description in their training manuals could never quite prepare them for moments like this, when the quiet determination of a calf outweighed any instinct for self-preservation. He should have been searching for shade, nursing, or following the gentle steps of his herd. Instead, he had rooted himself to this patch of earth, refusing to move until something changed. The mother's skin bore the marks of dehydration, thin cracks at the edges of her ears, a dullness in her once deep wrinkles. Flies gathered at her side, but she barely twitched to move them away. The rangers scanned the ground nearby, noting faint tracks and shallow depressions, signs that the pair had wandered some distance before she collapsed. Her breath rattled softly, a sound almost swallowed by the shifting wind. The calf leaned forward again, nudging his mother's cheek with the cautious pressure of a young elephant testing for any sign of response. When she gave only a weak exhale, he released a quiet, trembling cry, far softer than the bellow of distress a calf might normally offer. It was as though he had used up his louder calls hours before and had been left with nothing but the soft remnants of his voice. A ranger whispered, "We're here now," letting his tone stay low, hoping the gentle rhythm might ease the calf's tension. The team paused several meters out, evaluating, watching for tiny shifts in muscle tone or breath that might guide their next move. They resisted every urge to rush in. Elephants, especially young ones, understood far more through subtle movement than sound. Any sudden approach could send him into panic, scattering him into the open savanna where he would be vulnerable and alone. The sun dipped lower, casting a softer gold over the scene. The calf's shadow stretched over his mother's side like a small, flickering guardian. The rangers observed the slight tremors in his body, signs of dehydration and strain. He lifted one foot and set it back down repeatedly, a repetitive motion of stress. Yet he never turned away from her. Every time the wind shifted or a bird called overhead, he responded by pressing in closer, anchoring himself beside her stillness. Minutes stretched, defined only by the faint lift and fall of the mother's ribs. The calf tucked his trunk briefly against her tusk, rubbing in a motion that seemed to plead for her to rise. The rangers exchanged glances, understanding that this was more than a medical emergency. It was a test of patience, of respect, of entering an intimate space without breaking the bond already frayed by exhaustion. They lowered their gear quietly, choosing a slow semicircle that would leave the calf with an open escape route if he needed it. The air felt heavy, as though the land itself was waiting for someone to take the first careful step. The calf paused, watching the quiet humans with hesitant trust, his trembling body settling as the evening air cooled around them. The calf did not flinch as the rescuers drew nearer, though every cautious step he took was measured by a mixture of fear and instinctive duty. He circled his mother in slow, looping patterns, pressing his small, still wobbly body close to her side with every pass. His trunk hovered near her face, occasionally brushing against her ear or nudged lightly against her shoulder. Soft rumbles spilling from his throat in short, hesitant bursts. Each sound seemed half question, half plea, a quiet insistence that he would not abandon her, no matter how long it took. The Rangers kept their distance, letting him move freely, their eyes searching for signs that might indicate how long she had lain there, and how he had endured these hours of lonely vigilance. The mother's breathing remained faint, a fragile rise and fall that the calf seemed to monitor with relentless attention. His ears twitched irregularly, flicking to catch any changes in the wind.
What?
The distant calls of birds or the slightest shift in the earth beneath them. He occasionally placed his forehead against her trunk, testing for a reaction, then withdrew slightly when there was none, only to circle her again, persistence overriding fatigue. The rescuers noted the deliberate care in his movements. There was no panic, only an intense loyalty that anchored him firmly to the spot. Dust swirled around their feet as the team slowed their approach, each movement conscious and restrained. They spoke sparingly, their voices low murmurs of reassurance. Though the calf seemed primarily attuned to physical gestures and the rhythm of their presence. "It's okay, little one," a ranger said, barely audible over the soft whisper of the wind. The words were more an offering of patience than command, a soft acknowledgement of the bond that had formed in these quiet, harrowing hours. The calf's small trunk lifted repeatedly, brushing the ground as if seeking reassurance or stability, then returned to sweep lightly over his mother's side. His legs quivered with exertion, each careful step a testament to the raw endurance of his young body. He nudged her gently with the tip of his trunk, then reared slightly to peek at the humans who lingered at the edge of his perimeter. There was hesitation in his stance, a mixture of wariness and the instinct to protect. Yet he did not run, did not cry out in alarm. The mother's side occasionally twitched in response to the calf's touch, subtle and almost imperceptible movements that drew a cautious glance from the rescuers. The calf pressed in closer, sensing that she was alive but weakened, and maintained his relentless vigil. He dipped his head low, rubbing his trunk along her cheek in a motion that conveyed both recognition and encouragement, a silent conversation conducted without words. Dust clung to his damp skin, making the contours of his small muscles more visible, revealing the strain of constant motion and emotional devotion. The sun shifted, light softening across the dry savanna as shadows grew longer. The calf's ears lifted and flared at the distant cries of other elephants, yet he did not respond to them. His world had narrowed to this single figure lying before him, a mother who depended on him in ways that he did not fully comprehend, but honored instinctively. He stepped carefully over shallow depressions in the earth, trunk extended, sniffing the soil and her scent, reaffirming his presence in the tiny perimeter they shared. The rescuers moved slowly, coordinating their approach in whispered glances. They understood that any abrupt movement might provoke fear or distress in the calf, whose eyes flickered between their hands and his mother. They noted how he mirrored her slight twitching and shallow breathing, responding almost in unison, a living tether to her survival. He was small, yet his dedication created an emotional gravity that anchored the team's focus, making it clear that the rescue would be as much about patience and respect as about medical care. Occasionally, the calf let out a soft, uncertain rumble, and the mother exhaled faintly in response, a subtle acknowledgement that drew a visible easing of tension in his small, rigid frame. He leaned closer, pressing the side of his head against her trunk, then drew back slightly, sniffing her face as if to gauge her condition. Each movement was careful, deliberate, and unhurried, the rhythm of his devotion a quiet heartbeat in the unfolding scene. By the time the rescuers had reached a careful position near the mother, the calf had completed multiple circuits around her, each lap punctuated with soft nudges and attentive observation. He stopped finally beside her head, resting one trembling front leg against her side, and released a low, drawn-out rumble that seemed to encompass exhaustion, worry, and unwavering loyalty. The team watched, silently their own hearts tethered to the persistence of this tiny, determined guardian. Even as the first tentative steps of intervention were planned, it was clear that the calf would not leave her side, not for a moment, and that the unfolding rescue would hinge as much on his steadfast presence as on the careful work of the humans now gathered in quiet observation. His insistence, patient and unwavering, became the emotional center of the scene, a reminder that even the smallest acts of devotion could anchor hope in the harsh and unpredictable wild. The mother shifted slightly, so faint that at first the rescuers thought it was only the wind stirring the dust. Then her chest lifted in a shallow, irregular rhythm, a fragile confirmation that she was still alive. Relief coursed quietly through the team, tempered by the stark reality of her condition. Her skin, dry and chalky under the late morning sun, revealed the severity of dehydration. A careful examination suggested she had ingested something toxic from a nearby waterhole, likely contaminated by runoff from upstream. Each breath was a labor, short and rasping, her trunk limp and unresponsive. The calf pressed closer, his small body almost fused to hers, trembling yet vigilant. Watching every movement, every motion of the rescuer's hands, a ranger knelt slowly, keeping his back to the sun and moving with deliberate slowness, reaching toward the mother with a small container of water. The calf froze mid-step, ears flicking, eyes wide with uncertainty. His trunk raised tentatively toward the humans, sniffing the air, sensing the intention behind the gentle movements. A soft rumble escaped him, low and questioning, but he did not retreat. The rescuers understood that this tentative trust had to be preserved. One whispered, "It's okay. We're helping her," careful to speak in even quiet tones, letting the words carry more reassurance than command. The mother's breath came in short bursts, and the team applied a damp cloth to her mouth, letting her inhale the moisture slowly, without forcing it. She shifted weakly in response, a small movement that told the team she recognized the relief that she was alive and reacting. The calf pressed his forehead gently against her trunk, letting out another soft call, almost a sigh of recognition. His small legs quivered as he leaned closer, the proximity between him and the rescuers shrinking as he assessed their intentions. The ground around them was baked and cracked. Dust and dry leaves stirred lightly by a breeze that carried the faint scent of distant trees and water. The mother's body shivered intermittently. The calf responded with repeated nudges, moving his small trunk along her side and rubbing gently, as if reminding her to stay upright, to fight. Every movement of the humans was mirrored in his attention. When they checked her pulse, he pressed closer. When they lifted her trunk slightly, he mimicked a small motion of encouragement. The team administered fluids carefully, letting them drip slowly into her trunk and mouth, monitoring every faint twitch of the eyes and ears. Each swallow, each tiny adjustment in her breathing, brought a visible easing in the calf's stance. He leaned in, letting one leg rest against her body and releasing a low, vibrating rumble, a sound of acknowledgement and cautious optimism. The rangers noted how he seemed to understand the intention behind their movements, finally allowing them into the space that had been exclusively his domain for hours. The mother's eyes blinked slowly, unsteady but present, as if recognizing the soft rhythm of care around her. Her trunk moved in small circles, weak but deliberate, testing the moisture on her skin and the warmth of the air. The calf mirrored her shifts, adjusting his position to stay close, nudging her lightly with the tip of his trunk whenever she trembled or pulled back. It was a delicate dance, a mixture of instinct, patience, and the human's careful guidance. The rescuers continued to work methodically, administering electrolytes and monitoring for signs of further contamination, while the calf remained an unwavering presence. He finally allowed a ranger to touch his trunk briefly, sniffing the hand and then leaning into it, a quiet sign that trust had begun to form. His rumbles softened, less anxious and more measured. Each exhalation, a small acceptance that the humans were allies, not intruders. As the sun climbed higher, the mother's breathing began to stabilize, slightly deeper, a faint shimmer of life returning to her eyes. The calf pressed his cheek gently against her side and released a low rumble, as if to say she was not alone, and that together they could endure what had begun as an impossible ordeal. Around them, The savannah held its quiet breath, wind moving through dry grass, dust settling, and the subtle, unbroken rhythm of life carrying them forward. By mid-morning, the team had established a careful routine of hydration and observation, and the calf finally allowed himself to rest briefly. Leaning against his mother, small body relaxed but still attentive. His loyalty had anchored the rescue, and in return, the mother's subtle responses had begun to teach him that help could exist beyond instinct. A fragile understanding formed quietly in the dust and sun. The mother's chest heaved with shallow, irregular breaths, each rise and fall a quiet struggle against the exhaustion that weighed on her enormous body. The calf pressed close, trembling slightly under the effort of holding vigil. His small legs bent in readiness to support her, to nudge, to guard. Every time she exhaled a faint, rasping sigh, he leaned closer. Trunk sweeping along her side in tentative encouragement, ears flicking to catch any movement or sound that might signal further distress. His rumbles were soft, almost hesitant, low vibrations that seemed to thread between them, carrying comfort without urgency. The rescuers worked with deliberate patience, moving around her in careful arcs, offering water in measured sips and wetting cloths to cool her parched skin. Each intervention was slow, conscious of the calf's watchful presence, aware that one sudden motion could provoke panic or distrust. One ranger whispered, "Almost there." "Stay steady," words that barely rose above the soft exhalation of the wind. The calf flinched slightly at the sound but did not retreat. Instead, he pressed even closer, tiny muscles trembling as he leaned into her side, his trunk brushing against her face in the smallest gestures of insistence. The mother shivered with each gulp of water, the effort making her flinch, but she began to respond in subtle ways. A flick of her trunk, a weak lift of her head, and, for the first time, a faint stirring of recognition in her dull eyes. The calf's small rumbles grew steadier, quiet coaxing that seemed to communicate the simplest of truths. She was not alone, and he would not abandon her. He lifted a front leg and rested it lightly against her side, trunk curling along her shoulder as though to hold her upright, to remind her of the life that still pulsed beneath her skin. Minutes stretched into hours, each measured moment filled with tension and cautious hope. The mother's breath became slightly deeper, a rhythm less jagged and more persistent, while the calf mirrored her shifts, moving with her as she adjusted her weight. Tiny grains of dust clung to his wet trunk and flanks, evidence of the hours he had spent kneeling and leaning, never straying from her side. The rescuers exchanged silent glances, aware that the calf's unwavering presence was as crucial as any medical intervention. Then it happened, a quiet twist that no one had anticipated. As the calf leaned in, letting out a low, vibrating rumble of encouragement, the mother responded. Her trunk twitched slightly, brushing against his, a weak but unmistakable acknowledgement. Her eyes flickered toward him, a trace of life and recognition returning. The calf froze mid-step, ears lifted, sensing the subtle shift. He rumbled again, and this time she exhaled in time with him, their movements forming an unspoken dialogue of connection, a delicate rhythm of mutual support. The rescuers paused, letting the moment settle between them. The calf remained pressed against her, body trembling yet steadfast, every small movement conveying loyalty and hope. The mother's breathing, while still fragile, showed steady improvement, each shallow exhale carrying the promise of endurance. She shifted slightly, leaning into him as if drawing strength from his presence, her massive head resting momentarily against his smaller form. The air around them seemed to hold its own quiet breath, a gentle acknowledgement of the fragile miracle unfolding. Dust settled from the long vigil, the heat of the day softening, as though the land itself paused to witness the small, tender bond. The calf stayed with her, attentive, alert, every muscle poised for guidance or support. He did not move away. He would not leave, and now, neither did she. It was a scene of quiet endurance, the culmination of patience, trust, and instinctive devotion. The mother's faint acknowledgement of her calf's rumble marked a turning point, a subtle but profound signal that the life they had fought to protect was clinging on, not through force or urgency, but through the gentle, trembling hope of two beings bound together by instinct and love.